Welcome back, passive income investors alike. Today, the big short Steve Esmond is out targeting the Canadian banks. It's like every other month, someone's trying to take down my banking system here in Canada, and I want to break this down for you. So let's get right into it. Alright guys, so here we go. I want to break down my own personal opinion on what I think is going on in the Canadian banks, and we're going to watch a really quick video just to start this off, make this entertaining, and this is from BNN, the Bloomberg guy, so just listen along real quick.
There was a lot of reaction this week to a sweepingly bearish call on Canada's banks by a Bay Street analyst. For more on this, we've got Paul Bagnall. Of course, we'd have to bring you in for this.
Well, for a long time, as both of you know, there's been concern about the stretched Canadian consumer, a slowdown in consumer borrowing, and what it means for the banks, either in a deceleration of their most important business, which is lending to consumers around the country, or in a more severe scenario, a run-up, a significant and material run-up in loan losses at the banks. And this week, that debate was really crystallized and sharpened by Nigel D'Souza at Veritas, who early in the week released a report, an 18-page report, in which he, went to sell on one more Canadian bank, that's Bank of Montreal, and B, now stated that he has sell ratings on all 6 of the big 6 Canadian banks, largely for this reason. He believes that household debt to income ratios are extreme. He focuses in particular on the household debt service ratio, which is the proportion of a household's income that is devoted, that must be devoted to necessary debt payments. It's been running up, he says, for a couple of years, and he expects it to continue to do so through this fiscal year. He is convinced that that is going to trigger a wave of more material loan losses to the banks. He thinks Bay Street has got it wrong on earnings expectations, and that we'll see these the earnings come in a negative way, disappointing the street, and see the stocks contract as well. Here's a brief.
So I don't think he's necessarily wrong about this. I mean, household debt obviously is going up. It's going up everywhere, has been since the beginning of debt. Like, people just keep taking on more and more, but, you know, inflation, things like that. The millennials, especially living at home with their parents, buying new cars, taking out student loans. I can see why, like, the household debt per household is kind of going up. Is this something to be scared of? I don't know, because it's a different story depending on the articles you're reading, because there's other people saying that it has everything to do with the pricing of housing that's going to bring down the banks. Because if you live in Toronto, or I think this is the Motley Fool that was talking about this, the case against Canadian banks, because essentially the bear case boils down to taking the Canadian largest bank financial institutions, a collapse in the nation's housing market. Because if you guys live anywhere in the city, you're going to know that housing is insanely expensive. Not just insanely, but like ridiculously expensive, guys. 2.5 million. Look at how nice this house is for 2.5 million. And then look at this old brick house for the same price. Housing in Toronto is insane. And there's a good reason for this, and it has a lot to do with foreign buyers and people like Dan Locke. Dan Locke lives in Vancouver. So because homes have gotten so expensive, I think they're trying to do a cooling down without crashing the market. But I don't think a crash is going to come, guys. I don't think you're going to see that even if housing prices come down. I think the people buying these homes can actually afford these mortgages. Let's be real. You're not buying this unless you can afford the mortgage. So it's a really hard thing to quantify what it would take down the Canadian banks. But lately, there's been this cycle going around of people just shorting and shorting and shorting the banks. But as we look at the banks, Bank of Nova Scotia is one I bought a lot. I own most of these banks, guys. I own 3 of them. Bank of Nova Scotia, I own Canadian Imperial, BMO as well. Bank of Nova Scotia has been my worst performing by equity. I bought it for the dividends. The dividends are very healthy, increased slightly, but you haven't got a lot of equity growth in the last 5 years. Canadian Imperial Bank, I've been buying a lot of great dividend yield right now, and it's been kind of getting pressured down because of this news again. Royal Bank's been one of the best performing banks of all time in Canada. I don't like it as much because the dividend isn't as high, and I'm looking to live off dividend income. BMO, when I was buying it, I was picking it up in this dip down here, so I was getting a really nice dividend off that one. TD I don't own, but it's a good international buy. They do a lot in the US, and there's another big one that they just added to their short list, but has had a great performance over its lifetime as well. So, I mean, I don't know personally what the case is with this, guys. I honestly don't think the banks are going to crash. I could be horribly wrong about this, but I'm buying them at these levels. It doesn't really scare me at all. You know, if all the accounts in these banks are actually government backed, so if something horrible happened, you do have some kind of insurance with the government, which I'm sure would bail you out similar to what they did in the US. But again, I don't see that happening, guys. Just because there's higher household income debt doesn't mean a lot of people can't afford it. It's usually just the people like me, maybe people like you, not people like Dan Locke. Dan Locke can definitely afford these kind of homes. Again, he lives in Vancouver. If you haven't seen his house, you might have to scroll through here, maybe find one of his videos, because he usually does a lot of tours of that nice condo he's got down there in Vancouver, guys. So you can blame the housing market going up because of people like this. But again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not making it out like this is a bad thing. I actually like seeing things do well, because when things go up over time, guys, a lot of people get rich. It's just naturally what happens. There's a big divide becoming between the rich and the poor here in Canada. I think the divide gets bigger and bigger as house equity goes up. And if you don't have equity in anything, like no businesses, no stocks, no real estate, you're kind of becoming screwed. But that's the reality of life, guys. The rich get rich because they own businesses and hard assets. The poor become poor because they spend their money frivolously and they don't care about being poor. So, I mean, you have to work for this stuff, guys. This stuff isn't handed to you. I don't want anything to do with real estate right now, guys. Real estate it does scare me at these levels because it would stretch me really far to buy them. Maybe if I find my business to start creating more income, it won't be as big of a deal. But right now, I'm not looking to buy in Toronto. Homes are way too crazy. You'd save more money buying an hour out of the city and just buying a cheap car and driving in. You'd probably save yourself like 1.5 million, if not more, because I'm about an hour and 20 from downtown Toronto, and housing out here is around $500,000. But even then, because I travel so much, I'm still not going to waste my time on a house. But I want you guys to let me know in the comment section below, what do you think is going to happen with the housing market in Canada? This is a crazy thing that's been going on for the last 2 years. It's just this big case of right here, there was a lot of people saying the housing market was going to crash. Real estate was exploding in this time. And then, oh my God, they all came back, and now we're getting the same story again. All these people with the bear cases against the Canadian banks. Mind you, the Canadian banks survived 2008 like it was nothing. Like, we didn't have the same economic crash that you saw in the U.S. Thanks to Stephen Harper, I believe, was the one that helped cushion the big blow when that happened. But if we look at look at Bank of America, like, it hasn't even come close to recovering from that crash. It almost wiped some of these stocks out. So I still think the Canadian banks are better than the U.S. banks. They pay better dividends, and they're still increasing those dividends. Their books aren't terrible. Their PEs are low. I mean, what more could you ask for? I mean, there could become some kind of default rate that expands on my generation. I think it'll be my generation that brings down the Canadian banks, if it's anything, because we're the ones living at home, taking out debt and student loans. So, I mean, how can you say that it's normal? I know so many people that own homes and they're fine. Some of them are pretty leveraged, but they're making the payments no problem. So, anyways, interesting story today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Tomorrow, I'm going to be breaking down my 6-figure portfolio, guys. That's right. I'm going to be doing an update on how much money I've made or lost in equity, and have my dividends increased, and what's been going on with my 6-figure portfolio. Always fun, guys. I love you very much. Stay super cool. Stay super awesome. And I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow.